The elderly. I don't care if you're the toughest guy in the world. As human beings, there's something that cuts deep anytime we see a couple in their golden years walking, often very slowly, hand in hand, in love, enjoying their golden years together without a care in the world. But online scammers, where you and I see a happy couple, they see dollar signs. Anyone who targets the elderly is, to put it simply, an abhorrent person. They give me that feeling you get when you're watching court TV and you see a victim's relative sprint across the courtroom and put their hands around the person's neck and start Sorry, I'm getting wound up here. My grandmother lost $300 recently to an online Albanian scammer named Matteo. She only lost like $300, but it's the principle that drives me crazy. I mean, what kind of a person makes a living targeting the elderly? I'd answer that rhetorical question by saying these are mostly losers living in their parents' basements, but actually that's not true. These are sophisticated call center operations, often but not always based out of India and West Africa. Pop quiz. How many seniors fall victim to scams every year? A, 1 in 500. B, 1 in 200. Or C, 1 in 100. Try this, 1 in 10. That's an insanely high figure, but why the elderly? Well, it turns out the stereotypes are true. They're usually retired or close to retirement and have a steady income. They often have a great credit history and high savings. Fact. A 2020 study showed that people over 55 hold 72% of America's wealth. So maybe these scammers are onto something. Another reason the elderly make perfect targets for financial predators is their isolation. They often live alone. As heartbreaking as it sounds, a phone call, an email, a text message can really excite them, even if it's coming from a complete stranger. And even if that complete stranger is an Albanian scammer named Matteo. Another reason the elderly are often targeted specifically is because they tend to be very trusting. They grew up in a day when deals were sealed through a handshake and one's word was their bond. You and I know this, and so do the scammers, which brings me to my next point. The elderly are often new to technology. The internet's been around for what, like 30 years? So if you're 80, there's a good chance you are more familiar with whiteout than the delete key. Again, I'm generalizing here. Obviously, this does not apply to everybody, but it does apply to many of the elderly. So because the elderly are not digital natives like younger millennials and Gen Z, they are more prone to be confused about the trustworthiness of, say, an email. Another reason the elderly are targeted is because with great age often comes worsened decision making. What? Don't look at me, I do not make these rules. But it's an unfortunate fact of life that as we age, we tend to experience some degree of cognitive decline. And in extreme cases, as age-associated cognitive decline might represent Alzheimer's or dementia. And the poor judgment that often accompanies conditions like this can make the elderly prey for online scammers. Last but not least, the reason elderly are targeted is because of concerns about their independence. Let me explain here. When facing down inevitable mental and physical decline, it's understandable to worry about your loss of independence. Add the fear of dementia into the mix, or simply the fear of looking old, and you can see why the elderly are often very reluctant to report crimes that have been committed against them. They simply fear that if they speak up, their family will call in the guys in white coats. Okay, now that we know why scammers target the elderly, let's talk about what we can do about it. In order to protect grandma and grandpa or our parents from the clutches of the internet's most wanted, there are a few things we need to do. The first is we need to know what to look out for. First off, we have medical-related scams. Being old comes with health concerns. That's stating the obvious. Seniors have plenty of reasons to feel overwhelmed. Medicaid, Medicare, and the Affordable Care Act, none of these things are easy to navigate. The US has a painfully complex healthcare system that's difficult even for the most able-bodied person to navigate. Enter the scammer. It's not uncommon for scammers to represent Medicare representatives to entice seniors into disclosing sensitive personal information like their social security numbers. They may offer the victims phony or unnecessary services at fake clinics, and then use the personal data they've collected to bill Medicare and make off with the money. Next up, we have fake investment schemes which target people of all ages, but especially the elderly. And that's because many seniors live on fixed, insufficient amounts of income thanks to Social Security, and they could really use the extra money. You see, to scammers, it actually doesn't matter whether you, your parents, your grandparents are loaded or broke. You're still a target. Either somebody doesn't have money and is thus more susceptible to schemes promising an extra buck, or they've got surplus cash that's looking for a return. Either way, they're a target. Next up comes maybe the morally most corrupt scam of all, the false charity scam. You see, fraudsters love to pose as members of fictitious charities. They'll call, they'll email, they'll text their victims, and sometimes they might even show up at their door. And some of these fake online charities are difficult to identify. They come with legit looking websites, active phone numbers, basically everything you would expect a real company to have. Luckily, there are some resources that you can use to spot a fake charity. Chief among them are sites like Charity Watch or Charity Navigator, which you can use to assess a charity's effectiveness. These sites will also tell you whether the person who reached out is a member of the charity or not. Next up, we have good old-fashioned email phishing. If an elder in your life shows you an email asking them to update or verify their personal information, be very suspicious. Don't, under any circumstances, click the links in them. At first glance, these emails can seem super legitimate, and the more thorough scammers out there might have actually gone through the trouble of researching their targets online on social media. Now, this would be kind of impressive, but given the fact that scammers have nothing else to do, nothing else going on in their lives, it's actually not that impressive at all. More info on how to protect your loved ones from these scams specifically to come. Next up, we have the grandparent scam. Now, what if I told you that your grandparents' sweetness, their kindness of heart, could be used against them? Crazy, right? Well, not if you're a middle-aged guy named Matteo, it's not. Matteo, if you're listening to this, just know that we've already got a PI on your case. We're coming after you, and in a moment, you are Sorry, got carried away again. The way that this highly sophisticated scam works is that the fraudster calls an elder pretending to be, say, their grandchild. They might start the call by saying something like, "Guess who?" and wait for the grandparent to say a name. If the strange accent goes unnoticed and grandma says something like, "Billy, I thought you were killed in World War II," the trap is set. Now all the scammer has to do is say something like, "No, grandma, I'm okay. I need a little bit of money for rent." The excuse will vary, but what these stories all have in common is the need for immediate cash. Rent's due, or there's an unexpected car repair bill, something like this. Now, these are just the top 5 elder scams. There's a whole host of other scams out there. Insurance scams, romance scams, the Nigerian prince scam, which still brings in a few $1,000,000 a year somehow, sweepstakes and lottery scams, tech support scams. Unfortunately, it's a really long list, and if you want to learn more about some of the scams out there, go ahead, click the link in the video description below. You'll be taken to a landing page where we have covered the vast majority of them at Home Security Heroes. Okay, now that we know the who, the why, and the how, it's time to dive into what we can do about these elder scams. These are the 5 things you can do to protect the elders in your life from getting scammed. The first thing you can do is remain present in your loved ones' lives. As we've learned, isolation is one of the main reasons that seniors get scammed. Check in on your parents, check in on your grandparents. Make sure they have someone to talk to at all times. Ask them about their day and if anything unusual has happened lately. Did they meet an Albanian guy named Matteo or a Nigerian prince named Abimbola? Ask them to tell you more about how they met this charming stranger. Remember, if isolation is a scammer's best friend, then connection needs to be yours. Next up, you need to help your loved ones create strong passwords. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's not a secure password, it's easy to remember, but it needs to be changed. Create strong passwords that use numbers, letters, and special characters, make them a minimum of 15 characters long, and perhaps train the loved ones in your lives on using a password manager like Bitwarden to create more complex passwords and store them in a secure vault. Never let them use one password for multiple accounts. Next up, you can help the elders in your lives with online shopping. If your grandma loves online shopping, make sure she limits her purchases to reputable online retailers. Explain the importance of HTTPS and the padlock symbol in the browser bar to confirm that a site is secure. Next up, avoid suspicious links. Personally, I tell my parents not to click on any links, even the ones that I send them directly. I also tell them never to take calls from suspicious or unknown caller IDs. Next up, make sure all of the family members in your life are monitoring their monthly statements. I was recently the victim of credit card fraud, and the way it often works is the scammers will put small charges on your credit card in the hopes that you don't notice them. Had I not made a habit of checking my statements regularly, this easily could have gone unnoticed. Additionally, make sure everyone in your life is shredding documents, not just throwing them out, because dumpster diving is still a thing. Next up, consider signing up for ongoing credit monitoring with a service like Aura. This will notify victims in near real time if their identity is compromised and will provide a 24/7 identity theft restoration specialist who can help walk them through the process of recovering their identity. Discounts to Aura and other recommended services available in the video description below. Now, if you're watching this because someone you know has been scammed, here are 5 things you need to do. 1, don't panic. We're going to get through this. 2, document what happened in writing. 3, report the scam to the Federal Trade Commission immediately and contact the bank and credit card providers of the victim ASAP. 4, file a police report with your local police department. Most creditors will request a copy of this police report, so be sure you have a copy of it along with the case number. 5, change all passwords. And I mean all of them, whether passwords to financial institutions or social media accounts. Be sure you're showing lots of love and attention to your friends and family members who happen to be older. Show some interest in their lives, initiate a conversation, and if grandma tells you that she's considering marrying an Albanian guy named Matteo, let me know in the comments below so we can exchange information and finally track down this dude. I will find you, Matteo. I hope you found this video helpful, and another one is going to autoplay right now.